A German shepherd returned after 4 winters, and a U.S. Marine realized the eyes were the same. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The storm had quieted just enough for the snow to whisper instead of roar, drifting across the wooden porch of an old cabin tucked against the Montana pines. The night was pale, the kind of winter cold that makes the air feel thin, almost breakable. Inside, Staff Sergeant Noah Carter sat alone, shoulders slightly bowed, the glow of a small lamp brushing the side of his face. 4 winters had carved themselves into him, long, silent seasons spent waiting for something he could never quite name but could never let go of. In his hand rested a worn leather collar, the metal tag dulled by time. He turned it slowly between his fingers, as if the motion itself could warm a memory. Sometimes, when the wind pressed against the cabin walls, he swore he could hear paws pacing outside, the quiet rhythm of a life that used to shadow his own. But tonight felt different. The cold carried a stillness that made his breath catch, the way a man pauses before opening a door he's afraid will be empty. Noah closed his eyes, letting the hush settle. He remembered another winter, sand instead of snow, the desert night colder than expected. He remembered a young German shepherd leaning against his leg, steady as a heartbeat, amber eyes bright with a trust that had no conditions. Those eyes were the last thing he saw before the world had turned white and silence had taken everything. He exhaled slowly, the cabin creaking around him. The past didn't knock, it seeped in like cold through old window frames. He rubbed his thumb across the faded engraving on the tag, Scout. The name felt heavier now, like speaking it might reopen something he wasn't sure had ever fully closed. Outside, the wind shifted. Snow tapped lightly against the window, soft, hesitant. Almost like a signal. Noah lifted his head. Something in the air felt alive, as if the night itself were holding its breath. He straightened, listening. There it was again, a faint scrape along the porch, then another, slow and deliberate. Not the wind. Not a branch. A presence. His pulse tightened, not with fear, but with a strange, impossible ache, the kind that comes when hope, long buried under 4 winters, stirs like an ember beneath ash. He set the collar down gently, rose to his feet, and stepped toward the door, unaware that beyond it, a pair of familiar amber eyes waited in the snowbound dark. Noah's hand hovered over the door handle as the gentle scraping came again, softer this time, almost polite, as if whoever or whatever stood outside understood that a man's heart could only take so much in one night. The lamp behind him flickered, its glow catching the rim of the leather collar on the table, and for a moment Noah wondered if the past had learned how to walk back home. He pulled the door open slowly. A breath of cold air swept in, carrying the scent of pine and winter earth. Snow curled across the wooden floorboards like a living thing, and in the center of it stood the German shepherd, his coat dusted white, his frame lean from long travel. But it was the eyes that held Noah still. Amber, steady, watchful. He had known that gaze in deserts and dust storms, in early mornings when the world was nothing but possibility and duty. Now it shone back at him through a veil of snow, quiet and unwavering. Noah lowered himself slightly, not wanting to startle the visitor. "Hey there," he whispered, his voice tight, careful, the way a man speaks to something he fears might disappear. The shepherd took one step forward, then paused, head tilting as if measuring whether this doorway still belonged to him. A tiny puff of warm breath drifted from his muzzle, melting a small patch of frost on the porch. Noah extended his hand, palm open, letting the cold numb his skin. The shepherd leaned in, not touching, just close enough for Noah to feel the warmth radiating from his fur. A soft sound escaped the dog, low and familiar, like the hum of recognition that used to drift through quiet nights overseas. The moment pressed against Noah's chest. He stepped aside slowly, inviting the shepherd in without words. The dog entered with the cautious grace of someone returning to a place that lived only in memory. He paused just past the threshold, sniffing the air, scanning the small cabin with deliberate care. Noah watched him move, watched the way he checked corners, the way his ears flicked at every creak. Patterns he had not seen in 4 winters. Patterns he had once trusted with his own life. The shepherd stopped near the hearth where the fire had burned down to amber coals. He lowered himself to the rug, curling into a loose circle, but his gaze never left Noah. Those eyes held something fragile, something that felt like a question and an answer in the same breath. Noah sat slowly across from him, unsure whether the warmth rising in his chest was hope or fear of hoping. The room felt fuller now, as if some missing piece had slipped back into place. Outside, the wind softened, brushing the cabin walls with a gentler rhythm, almost as if the night itself understood that something long separated was finding its way home again. Noah let out a breath he had been holding for years, a quiet release that seemed to settle the air between them. The shepherd blinked once, slow and deliberate, and in that simple gesture Noah saw a memory flicker to life, pause beside his boots, dawn light in desert dust, and the silent promise of a companion who had never walked away in spirit. And now, against all reason, against 4 winters of silence, he was here, breathing the same warm air, watching Noah with the same unwavering eyes. The fire settled into a soft glow, casting gentle waves of light across the cabin as Noah watched the shepherd rest, though rest was not quite the right word. The dog's body curled loosely on the rug, but his eyes stayed open, tracking every shift in the room with a quiet discipline that felt both instinctive and deeply familiar. Noah leaned back in his chair, elbows on his knees, letting the warmth seep into his palms. He could feel something stirring, the echo of routines once shared in distant places. The shepherd lifted his head slightly, ears tilting in a way Noah had not seen in years. It was a gesture that used to mean he was waiting for Noah's next move, waiting for direction, waiting for the unspoken rhythm they had built through countless dawns and quiet nights. Noah reached for a small tin bowl from the counter, filled it with warm water, and placed it near the rug. The shepherd rose slowly, not rushing, as if measuring whether he was permitted to cross the small distance. When he finally stepped forward, his paws made a soft sound against the old wooden floor. He lowered his head and drank, each sip steady, deliberate. Noah noticed something then, something small but devastating in its gentleness, the way the shepherd paused halfway through and looked up at him, as if checking that this moment was allowed to happen. "You must have come a long way," Noah murmured, his voice barely above a breath. The shepherd blinked, slow and calm, before returning to the bowl. Snow continued to brush the windows, the storm easing into a tired whisper. A sense of quiet acceptance settled over the room, the kind of peace that arrives when 2 lives recognize each other without needing proof. Noah stood and walked to a narrow shelf near the back wall. He pulled down a folded wool blanket, its corners slightly frayed from years of use. When he returned, the shepherd was watching him with that same level gaze, the one that made Noah's chest tighten with a memory he was not yet ready to name. He laid the blanket near the hearth, smoothing it with his hand. The shepherd approached, sniffed it gently, then lowered himself onto it with a soft exhale. Noah sat again, not close enough to crowd him, but close enough to share his warmth. The firelight caught the shepherd's eyes, reflecting a shine that made the room feel fuller, almost sacred. Noah could not yet say the name that hovered on the edge of his thoughts, but he felt it. It pulsed quietly between them like a heartbeat rediscovered. Time stretched gently, the cabin settling into a deeper silence. The shepherd shifted, placing his head on his paws, but his gaze remained fixed on Noah as if anchoring himself to something he had carried across miles and seasons. Noah let his own eyes soften. He did not know how the dog had survived 4 winters or what paths had guided him through snow and silence. He only knew that the presence, now lying on his blanket, held a piece of his life he thought he had lost forever. And as the night pressed in around them, Noah felt something he had not felt in years, the first fragile edge of belonging returning, as quiet as breath, as steady as the eyes watching him in the firelight. Morning crept into the cabin gently, brushing pale gold across the wooden floor as if testing whether the night's fragile peace had survived until dawn. Noah woke to the soft pop of cooling embers and the quiet sound of breathing nearby, steady and deep. For a moment he lay still, letting the warmth of the rising sun settle over his face before turning his head. The shepherd was already awake. He sat upright on the wool blanket, posture calm, gaze fixed on Noah with an attentiveness that felt almost like a greeting. There was no urgency in his eyes, no fear, only a quiet recognition that stirred something deep in Noah's chest. "You are an early riser," Noah whispered, his voice still thick with sleep. The shepherd tilted his head slightly, the same gentle questioning motion Noah remembered from years ago when mornings meant gearing up and stepping into the unknown. Noah pushed himself upright, rubbing his hands together as the chill of the room settled into his palms. He crossed to the small stove, lit a match, and coaxed a fresh flame into life. The shepherd watched every movement, not tense, not anxious, but observant, as though memorizing the rhythm of a home he once knew. "You must be hungry," Noah murmured. He reached into a cabinet, pulling out a can of dog food he kept on hand for the strays that sometimes wandered near the forest line. He placed the bowl on the floor, stepping back to give the dog space. The shepherd approached with quiet steps, lowered his head, and ate with a careful steadiness, pausing every so often to glance at Noah, as if making sure the world around him was real. While he ate, Noah noticed small details he had missed the night before, the faint curve of an old scar along the shepherd's left ear, the way his right paw turned out slightly when he walked, the subtle shift of his gaze when certain sounds drifted in from outside. These were not the marks of a stranger. They were echoes of shared days, the kind that time could weather but not erase. When the shepherd finished, he stepped toward the door, placing his paw softly against the bottom edge as if asking permission to go outside. Noah opened it, and cold air rolled in, crisp with the scent of pine and the distant hush of snowmelt beginning somewhere deep in the forest. The shepherd stepped out, lifting his face to the sun. For a moment he simply stood there, breathing in the morning as if reacquainting himself with a world he had crossed many miles to return to. Noah followed him onto the porch, arms folded against the chill. The forest stretched before them, quiet and endless, its shadows long and soft. The shepherd moved down the steps, sniffing the ground, tracing slow circles near the edge of the clearing. Noah watched, noticing again the way he paused every few moments to look back, making sure Noah was still there. It was a small thing, but it tightened Noah's breath. That habit had been formed long before Montana, long before 4 winters rewrote both their paths. The dog returned to the porch, sitting beside Noah with a closeness that did not need explanation. Noah felt the weight of the moment settle into him, warm and heavy like a memory regained. He rested his hand gently on the shepherd's back, unsure whether he was comforting the dog or himself. The sunlight climbed higher, washing the clearing in a soft glow. In the quiet of that early hour, with the world holding its breath around them, Noah felt a truth begin to rise, slow and undeniable, like dawn breaking through long-held darkness. The morning stretched into late afternoon, bringing a gentle warmth that softened the edges of the Montana cold. Sunlight filtered through the tall pines, leaving thin golden stripes across the porch where Noah and the shepherd sat together, neither speaking, neither needing to. The quiet between them felt different now, fuller, as if the day itself was trying to mend something that had been torn open for far too long. Noah studied the shepherd's posture, the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the way his ears shifted at distant sounds. Every small gesture tugged at memories he had buried under seasons of silence. He reached for his thermos, pouring a small measure of warm water into his hand. The shepherd approached without hesitation, lowering his muzzle to drink from Noah's palm, the warmth of his breath brushing Noah's skin with a gentleness that made something deep inside him ache. "You trust me," Noah murmured, and the words carried more weight than he expected. The shepherd lifted his head, blinking once with a softness that felt like a quiet acknowledgement. Noah stood and walked into the cabin, retrieving the old leather collar from the table. The metal tag, worn and dulled, caught a glint of afternoon light. When he stepped back outside, the shepherd's gaze followed him with careful focus. Noah crouched in front of him, holding the collar in his hands, not offering it, not pushing it closer, simply letting the dog see it. The shepherd's tail gave a small, hesitant sway. He leaned forward, sniffing the leather, then tracing the tag with the tip of his nose. Noah felt the breath leave his body. It was the same gesture, the same quiet ritual the dog had done years ago when Noah first fastened the collar around his neck before a long desert patrol. The shepherd stepped closer and pressed his forehead gently against Noah's chest, a gesture so soft and deliberate that Noah had to close his eyes. The weight of it was overwhelming, not because it was heavy, but because it carried the memory of mornings when loyalty was the only certainty they had. Noah slid his hand along the shepherd's back, feeling the warmth beneath the fur, the steady heartbeat that felt impossibly familiar. "If you are who I think you are," he whispered, "I am right here." The shepherd exhaled, slow and steady, as if answering him. Noah sat beside him on the porch step, the collar resting between them like a bridge to a life interrupted. A breeze drifted through the clearing, carrying the scent of melting snow and distant cedar. The world around them felt caught in a delicate pause, as if nature itself was waiting for Noah to fully accept what his heart already knew. The shepherd shifted slightly, leaning his shoulder against Noah's leg with the easy confidence of someone who had once walked every step at his side. Noah looked down at him, and for the first time in 4 winters, he allowed himself to feel the fragile spark of hope without pushing it away. The dog lifted his head, meeting Noah's eyes with a depth that seemed to speak across distances and seasons. In that soft, unbroken gaze, something long dormant stirred awake, steady and unmistakable, as if time had circled back to remind them both that some bonds do not lose their way, even when the world believes they have vanished. The late afternoon softened into early evening, drawing long shadows across the clearing as the last traces of sunlight clung to the tops of the pines. The quiet of the forest deepened, settling around the cabin like a blanket, gentle and unhurried. Noah remained on the porch with the shepherd at his side, the old leather collar resting between them. The air felt still, as if waiting for a truth that neither of them had found the courage to speak yet. The shepherd shifted, touching his nose to the collar once more. The gesture was small, almost hesitant, but it carried a weight that reached straight into Noah's chest. He felt something inside him stir, a memory rising not as a sharp ache but as a soft breath, familiar and steady. Noah stood slowly, brushing his palms against his jeans. "Come on," he said in a quiet voice meant for both of them, not wanting to break the fragile calm that had settled. The shepherd rose with him, stretching his legs, then falling into step beside him with a natural closeness that tightened Noah's throat. They walked toward the tree line, the soft crunch of old snow beneath their boots and paws creating a rhythm that felt almost like the echo of footsteps from years before. The forest welcomed them with the scent of cedar and melting frost. Warm air drifted through the branches as they wandered deeper into the quiet, Noah letting the shepherd guide the pace. Every few feet the dog paused, sniffing the ground, lifting his head, taking in the familiar trails of a land he seemed to recognize even after so much time away. Noah watched him closely. The way he paused at certain spots, the way he circled slowly before moving on, the way he looked back at Noah as if asking if everything was still as it should be. It all tugged at something deep and old. They reached a small clearing where Noah used to train with him, years before the winters stretched into silence. The snow here was thinner, revealing patches of dry grass and worn soil beneath it. The shepherd stopped at the center of the clearing. He turned once, twice, just as he had done before every drill, before every dawn run when they trained side by side. Noah felt his breath catch. The dog lowered himself onto his haunches and let out a soft sound, not a bark, not a whine, something in between. A quiet acknowledgement of a place they had once shared. Noah crouched beside him, resting one hand gently on the shepherd's shoulder. The dog leaned into the touch with a slow, steady pressure, as if telling Noah that this moment was real, that he had not imagined the recognition growing between them. "I do not know how you found your way back," Noah whispered, "but I am right here." The shepherd lifted his gaze to the sky, where the light was fading into a muted wash of pink and gold. Noah followed his eyes. The night would fall soon, but for the first time in a long while, Noah did not feel the familiar weight of darkness settling in his chest. Instead, he felt something else rising, quiet and warm. The shepherd gently nudged his knee, a reminder of presence, of connection, of a bond that had survived beyond explanation. They stood there together as the last light slipped behind the mountains, two silhouettes against a softening sky, the world holding its breath as a long-buried truth continued to unfold in the stillness between them. Night had settled fully by the time Noah and the shepherd made their way back to the cabin, the sky deepening into a velvet blue scattered with faint stars. The forest carried a quiet that felt almost reverent, the kind that comes when the world around two beings understands something sacred is unfolding. As they reached the porch, Noah opened the door and let the warm glow of the cabin spill out across the clearing. The shepherd stepped inside first, not with the hesitation of a guest but with the measured calm of someone returning to a place that had once held his scent. Noah followed, closing the door softly behind them. The fire crackled in the hearth, sending gentle bursts of warmth into the room. The shepherd circled near the blanket, then looked up at Noah with an expression that held a question, or perhaps an invitation. Noah knelt beside him, running his fingers gently through the warm fur along the dog's neck. He felt the rise and fall of breath beneath his hand, steady and familiar. "You remember this place," Noah said quietly. The shepherd blinked in a slow, thoughtful way, leaning ever so slightly into the touch. It felt like a confirmation. Noah sat beside him, letting the silence stretch between them. It was not uncomfortable. It felt like the kind of silence that had space for truths to surface at their own pace. After a while, the shepherd rose and walked toward the corner of the cabin where Noah kept a small storage chest. He paused there, glancing back as if waiting for Noah to notice. Noah did. His chest tightened as he stood and approached. The shepherd stepped aside, allowing Noah room. Noah opened the lid slowly. Inside lay items he had not touched in years, an old harness, a worn training rope, and a faded canvas pouch with a name stitched on it in small letters. The shepherd stepped closer, lowering his head and touching the pouch with his nose. Noah froze. The gesture was gentle, familiar, and impossibly precise. It was the same gesture the dog used to make before every training session, as though acknowledging his role with quiet pride. "It cannot be," Noah whispered, but the words felt thin in the presence of what his heart already knew. The shepherd looked up at him with a gaze that reached deeper than recognition. It was as if he had been waiting for Noah to see what had been in front of him since the moment he stepped out of the snow. Noah sank to one knee, lifting the pouch with both hands. The shepherd pressed closer, resting his head against Noah's shoulder. The warmth of it was grounding, the trust in it unmistakable. Noah closed his eyes, letting the weight of the moment settle through him like a slow, steady breath. Memories rose gently, early mornings on dusty trails, quiet nights under wide skies, shared glances that needed no words. When he opened his eyes, the shepherd was still there, still resting against him with a calm that spoke of loyalty carried across winters and miles. Noah exhaled softly, a breath that felt like it had been waiting 4 years to be released. In that still cabin, beneath the quiet hum of the fire and the steady heartbeat pressed against him, Noah felt the truth draw near, no longer a distant ache but a living presence. And the shepherd, watching him with those unwavering amber eyes, seemed to whisper the same message without a sound: some bonds do not break, even when the seasons change and the world tries to make you forget. The fire had dimmed to a soft amber glow by the time the cabin settled into its deepest quiet, the kind that made every breath feel amplified in the stillness. Noah remained kneeling beside the shepherd, the worn canvas pouch resting in his hands, its faded stitching stirring memories that rose like distant echoes returning home. The shepherd stayed close, his head against Noah's shoulder, his warmth steady and grounding. After a long moment, Noah gently placed the pouch back into the chest and closed the lid, his hands lingering on the wood as if sealing away a truth that had waited 4 winters to be spoken aloud. He stood slowly, and the shepherd rose with him, mirroring the motion the way he used to during early morning drills. Noah walked toward the table where he kept a small lantern. He lit it, and a soft golden halo spread across the room, pushing back the edges of the night. The shepherd moved toward the doorway, pausing there with an expectant stillness, looking back at Noah as if urging him to follow. "All right," Noah murmured, lifting the lantern. "Lead the way." They stepped outside together, the lantern's glow trailing across the porch and out into the clearing. The air was cool, scented with pine and the lingering trace of melting snow. The shepherd walked ahead, not with the searching steps of a dog exploring new territory, but with a quiet certainty, as if he were guiding Noah toward something he needed to remember. They reached a small path just beyond the tree line, one Noah had not taken in months. The shepherd paused there, looking up at Noah with a calm insistence. Noah's breath tightened. This path had once led to a spot the two of them visited often, a ridge overlooking the valley where dawn light would spill like gold across the world. He lifted the lantern, letting its glow fall across the narrow trail. The shepherd moved forward, glancing back every few steps, waiting for Noah to follow. The climb was gentle at first, then steeper as the forest thinned. The lantern cast long shadows across the rocks and branches, each step stirring old memories. The shepherd's gait remained steady, purposeful. He stopped only when they reached the ridge. The valley stretched below them, silvered by moonlight. Noah felt the breath leave him, the cold air filling his lungs with a sharp clarity. The shepherd sat beside him, tail resting quietly on the ground. Noah sank to one knee in the snow-dusted grass, lantern light flickering beside him. "You used to bring me here," Noah said softly. "Every time the world felt too heavy." The shepherd lifted his face toward the sky as if remembering the same mornings, the same silent moments where nothing needed to be said. Noah set the lantern down, letting its warm glow settle over them. The shepherd leaned against him, not pushing, simply making his presence known. Noah rested his hand on the dog's back, feeling the warmth beneath the fur, the familiar rhythm of breath. A slow realization unfolded in his chest, gentle but undeniable. It was not proof he felt. It was recognition. A truth that had traveled through snow and silence, through seasons of doubt, through a world that often lost what mattered most. In that quiet place above the valley, with the lantern casting a small circle of light around them, Noah understood that some returns do not ask for explanation. They arrive with a steady gaze, a familiar weight, and a presence that whispers across time, "I never stopped finding my way back to you." The ridge held its quiet as Noah and the shepherd remained there beneath the soft wash of moonlight, the lantern's glow breathing gently against the dark. The world below stretched out in silver and shadow, a place that had carried both of their memories, even if each memory had traveled a different road to reach this moment. The shepherd shifted, placing himself a little closer to Noah, his shoulder brushing against Noah's knee with a familiarity that felt older than the 4 winters that had passed. Noah rested his hand on the dog's back, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of breath that grounded him more deeply than any words could. For a long time they stayed that way, letting the night wrap around them. Eventually, the shepherd lifted his head and looked toward the cabin, as if sensing it was time to return. Noah picked up the lantern, and together they walked down the trail, their shadows stretching long across the snow. When they reached the porch, the shepherd stopped just before stepping inside. Instead, he turned, scanning the tree line with a slow, thoughtful gaze, as though searching for something he had left behind or perhaps something he wanted Noah to understand before the night ended. Noah followed his gaze, seeing only the gentle sway of the pines and the soft shimmer of moonlit snow. "What is it?" he asked quietly. The shepherd did not move at first. Then he walked down the steps, pausing at the edge of the clearing. He looked back at Noah, inviting him once more to follow. Noah hesitated, lantern in hand, feeling the air shift in a way he could not explain. Something about the shepherd's posture, the calm certainty in his eyes, told him this was not wandering. This was remembering. The shepherd led him to a small hollow near the base of an old pine tree. The snow here was thin, brushed aside in places, revealing patches of earth that looked recently disturbed. The shepherd lowered his head, nudging the ground gently with his nose. Noah knelt beside him, brushing the loose snow away with his hands until he felt something under the surface. A strip of fabric. He lifted it carefully. It was part of an old training vest, weathered and frayed, the kind used years ago during drills. Noah's breath tightened. He remembered losing it during a blinding storm on a mountain overseas, a night when wind and sand swallowed every trace of direction. The shepherd touched the vest with his nose again, then pressed closer to Noah, as if placing the memory in his hands. Noah felt the weight of 4 winters settle into his chest, not heavy like grief but heavy like understanding. The shepherd stepped back and sat, watching Noah with a stillness that seemed to say, "I have never forgotten where you are." Noah held the torn piece of fabric against his chest for a moment, letting the truth rise in him like warmth from a long-absent fire. The shepherd approached again, gently pressing his forehead to Noah's hand. It was a gesture without urgency, without demand. A simple acknowledgement of a bond that had endured in silence. Noah lifted his other hand and traced the familiar curve of the dog's ear, feeling the faint scar beneath the fur. The world around them fell into an even deeper quiet, as if each breath they shared was part of a long-awaited answer. In that hollow beneath the old pine, lantern light flickering across snow and earth, Noah realized that the past had not returned to haunt him. It had returned to find him. And the shepherd, steady and patient beside him, was the living proof that some connections survive not by chance, but by the quiet loyalty that carries a heart home, no matter how many winters lie in between. The wind softened around the hollow as Noah held the weathered strip of fabric against his chest, its frayed edges brushing his fingers with the familiar texture of years long gone. The shepherd sat beside him in the quiet, his presence steady and patient, as if he understood that this moment belonged to something deeper than memory. Noah rose slowly, lantern light swaying across the snow, painting soft arcs of gold on the ground. The shepherd stood with him, matching his movements with a calm grace that tightened Noah's breath. They walked back toward the cabin, the clearing behind them settling again into moonlit stillness. When they stepped inside, the warmth greeted them gently, the fire in the hearth glowing low but steady, as if it had waited for their return. Noah placed the torn fabric on the table, smoothing it with a careful hand. The shepherd watched him with an unwavering gaze, tail resting quietly on the floor. Noah felt the room shift in a way he could not quite name. Something inside him settled, something that had been unsettled for far too long. He pulled out a chair and sat, letting the lantern's glow spread across the table. The shepherd moved closer, laying down at Noah's feet with a sigh that carried the weight of countless miles traveled and a long journey coming to rest. Noah leaned down, brushing his fingers along the dog's neck. "You held on," he whispered. "Through everything, you held on." The shepherd nudged his hand gently, not asking for anything, simply acknowledging the truth between them. After a moment, the dog stood and walked across the cabin to the old wooden chest once more. He touched the lid with his nose, then looked back at Noah with a meaning too clear to ignore. Noah joined him, opening the chest again. Inside, beneath the harness and the training rope, lay a small metal tag he had tucked away after the storm overseas. He had kept it not because he believed he would see the dog again, but because letting it go felt like admitting something he was not ready to face. Noah lifted the tag, its surface catching the lantern's glow. The shepherd stepped forward, sniffing it gently, then meeting Noah's eyes with a depth that said more than any voice could. Noah exhaled slowly, a breath full of recognition and rediscovery. He walked to the fireplace, the shepherd at his side, and held the tag near the flames, letting the warm light reveal the faint engraving he had memorized years ago. The shepherd pressed closer, resting his head against Noah's hip. Noah closed his eyes, letting the quiet of the cabin settle around them like a promise renewed. The fire crackled softly, shadows dancing across the floor. It felt as if time itself had circled back, placing them both in a moment that had been waiting patiently for 4 winters. Noah opened his eyes and looked down at the dog. The shepherd lifted his head, meeting his gaze with a calm certainty that reached straight into Noah's heart. In that gentle, silent exchange, the truth moved between them without the need for words. Recognition was no longer a possibility. It had become a revelation. And as the fire continued to glow, Noah understood that the journey which had carried this dog across seasons, across silence, across everything that had tried to scatter them, was a journey guided not by direction, but by devotion. The fire settled into a deeper glow as Noah stood in the quiet cabin, the metal tag warm in his hand, the shepherd pressed gently against his leg as if sensing the weight of the moment. The night outside had grown still, a calm so complete that even the wind seemed to pause, letting the silence inside take its rightful place. Noah lowered himself to the floor beside the dog, resting his back against the old couch. The shepherd immediately lay down beside him, stretching out so their shoulders touched. It was a simple gesture, but one threaded with years of unspoken understanding, as if the dog had carried this memory like a compass pointing him home. Noah let his fingers move through the warm fur, feeling the rise and fall of the dog's steady breathing. Every motion, every quiet sigh, echoed something familiar, something that reached beyond the 4 winters of separation. "I never stopped thinking about you," Noah whispered, almost afraid to break the stillness. The shepherd shifted just enough to press his head onto Noah's thigh, settling there with a soft exhale. The lantern flickered, casting gentle patterns of gold across the wooden floor, and Noah felt the truth settling over him with the same warmth. The life he had built alone, the silence he had carried, all of it began to loosen. After a while, the shepherd rose and walked toward the front door. He sat there, looking back at Noah with a quiet patience. Noah stood, slipping on his jacket and boots, understanding somehow that the night had one more memory to reveal. He opened the door, and the cool air wrapped around them as they stepped out onto the porch. The moon was high now, painting the snow in soft silver. The shepherd trotted ahead, leading Noah toward the edge of the clearing. He stopped near the old fence line where the forest began, then turned and waited. Noah approached slowly, unsure of what the dog wanted him to see, until he noticed a small indentation in the snow. He knelt. There, pressed into the frozen earth, was a set of prints, older than the fresh snow surrounding them. The tracks were faint, softened by time, but unmistakable in their path. They led from the far tree line straight toward the cabin, perfectly aligned, as if the dog had traveled miles with unwavering purpose. Noah touched the edge of one print, feeling the cold bite against his fingertips. "You walked all that way," he whispered, his voice catching in the quiet. The shepherd stepped closer, placing his paw gently beside Noah's hand. Noah looked down at the 2 prints, one old, one new, side by side in the moonlight. Something inside him shifted, not painfully, but with a slow, deep relief, like a wound finally allowed to breathe. He rose and placed his hand on the dog's back, feeling the warmth beneath the fur, the steady heartbeat that had carried this animal through 4 winters and across impossible distances. The shepherd leaned into him, grounding them both in the soft hush of the night. They stood there together, man and dog, the past and present meeting in a single quiet moment. The sky above them shimmered faintly with stars, the forest breathing a gentle rhythm around them. And for the first time in years, Noah felt whole, as if something long lost had finally stepped back into its place, bringing with it the quiet promise of all the morning still to come. Dawn inched over the treetops with a quiet tenderness, washing the clearing in a gentle pale light that softened the frost clinging to the ground. Noah stood beside the shepherd near the old fence line, the night silence still wrapped around them like a memory that did not want to fade. The faint tracks in the snow, old and new pressed side by side, shimmered softly beneath the morning light. Noah let his breath settle, feeling the quiet truth of the moment settle with it. The shepherd remained close, his fur brushing against Noah's leg in a way that felt intentional, steady, almost anchoring. They lingered until the first hint of warmth touched the air, then Noah knelt carefully, brushing away a thin layer of snow from the older print. He traced its outline with gentle fingers, as if touching a piece of a story that had been hidden too long. The shepherd leaned forward, placing his paw beside Noah's hand. The message was simple, unmistakable: "I always knew the way back." Noah stood slowly, his eyes softening as he looked toward the cabin. "Let us go home," he said quietly, not meaning the structure behind them alone, but the life waiting to be rebuilt inside it. The shepherd stepped into stride beside him, walking with a calm readiness that made Noah's chest warm. As they approached the porch, the morning sun caught the edge of the metal tag Noah still carried in his jacket pocket, reminding him of everything the night had revealed. Inside, the cabin welcomed them with a faint glow from the embers that had lasted through the night. Noah set the lantern on the counter and stirred the fire gently until it bloomed back into warm light. The shepherd settled onto his blanket, curling his body with an ease that suggested this place was no longer a question, but an answer. Noah moved around the cabin with quiet intention, making coffee, warming food, letting the morning unfold naturally. Every now and then, he caught the shepherd watching him, eyes soft, breath steady, as if ensuring that Noah truly understood he was not alone anymore. After breakfast, Noah sat on the floor beside the dog, brushing through his fur with slow, steady strokes. The shepherd leaned into him, eyes drifting half-closed in contentment. "You did not give up," Noah whispered, his voice carrying the fragile reverence of someone who had finally found something he never expected to see again. The shepherd lifted his head and placed it gently on Noah's knee, a gesture so simple and full of trust that Noah felt a deep warmth bloom in his chest. As the morning stretched on, Noah opened the windows just enough for a fresh breeze to move through the room. It carried the scent of pine and distant melting snow, a quiet reminder of all the seasons that had passed. But inside the cabin, with the shepherd resting against him, those seasons no longer felt like years lost. They felt like steps on a long, winding road that had led them back to each other. Noah looked down at the dog, his voice barely more than a breath. "You are home," he said. And the shepherd, with those unwavering amber eyes, seemed to answer without moving at all, as if the truth had lived inside him from the moment he stepped out of the winter dark. The sun lifted higher above the treetops, pouring warm light across the cabin walls as if blessing the quiet morning taking shape inside. Noah sat on the floor with the shepherd beside him, their breaths moving in a steady rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of a home rediscovered. The weight in Noah's chest, once a constant companion, had eased into something softer, something that felt almost like gratitude. The shepherd shifted, placing his head gently on Noah's thigh once more, as if reaffirming a bond that had endured every mile and every winter between them. Noah let his fingers drift through the warm fur along the dog's neck, the familiar rise and fall of breath grounding him in a way words could not. After a while, Noah stood and walked to the window, pushing it open wider. A soft breeze moved through the cabin, carrying the scent of pine, earth, and the faint sweetness of early thaw. It felt like the world was exhaling with them. The shepherd rose, stretching slowly, then padded over to sit at Noah's side. Together, they looked out into the clearing where sunlight spilled across the snow, turning it into a field of quiet brightness. "For winters," Noah murmured, not to question the past but to honor the journey that had carried them both here. The shepherd pressed his shoulder gently against Noah's leg, a reminder that the past, however heavy, had been walked through with purpose. Noah stepped outside, and the dog followed him onto the porch. The light made the shepherd's fur glow in warm shades of gold and amber. For a moment, Noah simply watched him, the ease in his stance, the calm steadiness in his eyes. He realized then that the dog had not just found his way back. He had carried something back with him, an unspoken truth, a promise that loyalty could survive even the longest silence. The shepherd moved down the steps, circling once in the soft snow before settling near the porch, lifting his face to the sun. Noah joined him, easing down beside the dog, their shoulders touching as they looked out across the land that had waited for them in its quiet way. Birds began to call from the treetops, gentle and unhurried, as if welcoming the morning. Noah felt the sound settle in his chest, light and warm. He looked at the dog, taking in the familiar shape of him, the steady gaze, the quiet strength that had always been there. "You came home," Noah said softly. The shepherd blinked, slow and sure, as though answering with a depth that could not be spoken. In that moment, Noah felt something shift inside him, a gentle fullness blooming where emptiness had lived for far too long. The world around them seemed to pause, holding the stillness like a blessing. Snow melted in soft droplets along the roofline, falling with the quiet rhythm of a promise renewed. The shepherd rested his head against Noah's arm, and Noah placed his hand gently over the dog's paw. No grand words, no dramatic gestures, only a shared breath in the golden light of morning. It was enough. Some stories did not need resolution to feel complete. Some stories found their ending in the simple return of what was lost. And as Noah sat there with the dog who had crossed 4 winters to find him, he understood that this was not an ending at all, but the beginning of the life they were always meant to return to together.